So welcome to Construction Conversations. Today I'm joined by my new co-host, Lars Herman. Lars, welcome. How you doing, man?
Thanks, Stephen. Great. Good to be here.
Good stuff. We're also joined by Hamad Chaudhry, former VP of Innovation and Construction Technology at Ellis Don, current VP of Market Development and Partnerships at Timescapes, and board member of multiple companies, Building Transformation, Provision, Society 5.0, and I will add current resident of our soon-to-be 51st state.
Oh, man.
I had to throw that in there, Hamad.
Yeah.
I've been working with some Canadians recently, and I've had some fun with that one. But Hamad, it's really good to have you on here, man.
Thank you. And I guess before we get into it, true north, strong and free,
That's
Canada.
right.
So
That's right.
I am a proud Canadian and Albertan. So I do hope that we can get through this amicably. And,
And,
I think,
I respect your independence. At least
thank you.
that is one American perspective.
There you go. Right off the bat, we're in the hot takes. So I think that's a good way to talk. Yeah. Good pace.
You got to start somewhere. So, I mean, you've been deeply involved in kind of the innovation side of construction. You've been driving a lot of conversations that I've appreciated around innovation. And, one of the questions I want to start with was like, from your perspective, what are some of the ways that you see traditional GCs maybe missing the mark around technology, or even just how they operate as a business? And it's a large question, so we can go in multiple directions. But I guess, like, what's the state of the union of commercial contractors in U.S. and Canada in your mind?
I think it's hard to kind of give it one frame. So we're going to have to look at breaking the market into a few segments. And when you look at the larger players, right, like you could say the ENR top 50 or whatever you want to kind of bucket into, the multi-billion plus kind of players, there's been a lot of energy and effort put into innovation, right? So we've been talking about BIM and VDC for 10, 15 years. Scanners have been out there for a while. If you look at the actual business and margins, how come they haven't gotten better then? And then there's the other side. There's been a lot of stuff, even what I was involved in up until recently, working with startups, working with accelerators and innovation programs. And then you step back and you look at what's happening across the industry. And again, like the margins are still generally an issue. Schedules are generally still behind schedule. You have this whole labor issue, not just from attracting labor and getting people to replace the ones that are retiring, but also getting more output from the folks that we do currently have in the industry. And then you have all the other trends that people don't really think about, like insurance costs are going up, the number of deductibles and claims, all that across North America have been going up. Leads to the question, why isn't that kind of, changed the top tier of construction across North America? And then you get to the, tier 2 and tier 3, kind of, if you want to call it, then they have their own problems. And, it's hard to have enough money to test everything out in the market. You got to start to get less and less and more focused on those products. So it might just be like, estimating or like just Procore type Autodesk or Fieldwire type document management, project management tools instead of this whole array that you would see. All that to say, I guess, is like what is happening in the overall industry is a lot of energy is being put, a lot of money's coming in from venture capital. A lot of folks like, yourself, Lars, and me have been in the industry trying to push innovation, and we're not necessarily seeing the outcome. So some of it, I think, comes down to the business paradigm of the way that we operate to do construction. Because I think, everybody's talked about this before, some of the field folks who have been on your podcast. If generally it's a lump sum or low price kind of mentality, that is a race to the bottom. How do you add value in that without taking away things? And then the other side is like the public projects, the alternative procurement methodologies, trying to bring them in to the current paradigm and expecting manufacturing type results is really, really hard to pull off. So I think that's a good way to start. I don't know what you think, Stephen, there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I asked you an impossible question and you provided a layered response, which I appreciate. I think, Lars, you started the GC, ran a GC, and have been deeply kind of integral in growing a mid-sized GC. What, when you hear some of those layers, what is it like from maybe the owner side or maybe the CEO side of a GC?
Yeah, founder side of it. It's interesting because I've taken some notes and, is it an industry problem or is it a leadership problem? And I think, and, Stephen, you use the word thesis a lot, right? I have a thesis that, we are victims of the industry relating to what we do and how we do it, right? It takes a really long time typically to build a project. And by that point in time, we've already got other projects going on, right? So it's like this, how do you shift a direction, but still desire this same outcome, right? A successful project, right? But how do you mechanically swap an engine out, right? Propellers, everything. While you're flying the plane, how do you retool it? And I think it's a real challenge relating to the industry. And it's almost like this leadership paradigm shift needs to occur. Now, that's just my opinion, right? That's just my opinion. But it's almost as if like some really smart people just need to get in the room and say, how can we simplify this stuff? Because we've layered on all this tech, right? We're stacking things, like all these supposed things to make us easier. But guess what? We're still behind a computer. We're still slaving away, and we're still having the same problems, right? So are we actually, are we getting faster? Are our margins increasing, right? And what I heard you just say was like, yeah, no, not really, right? It's the same things. In fact, people are more stressed than ever. Right. And the industry is struggling, I think, from a recruitment standpoint. So, if we talk about leadership and if we talk about, people problem, how are we encouraging that next generation to want to be builders? So, with all the companies and in your experience, Hamad, what are you seeing around what's getting young people excited? Is it software, or is it the fact that pouring concrete is really cool, right? And no software will replace the fact that we got to go pour concrete today, right? Today's poor day. It's a big day.
Yeah. There's so much that you've touched on there. I think one thing I do want to add too is, to your point, this is my opinion and my perspective, my point of view, based on maybe hundreds of conversations over the past 10 years that I've had, and that's formulated my experience. And again, it could be far from the truth, but nobody knows the absolute truth at the end of it. So that's why people are tuning in to listen to what you guys are talking about. From the folks that are coming into the industry, to your point, I don't think a lot of people get excited initially, except for a very small portion of the population, about the fun of actual construction until you experience it, right? Like when I first started going on site, the smell of concrete, you don't experience that, and then you start to realize like, oh shit, like there's something there.
That's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal, man. And then also the scale of things that are happening. So I think it's almost like a software company, same kind of thing. If you have a good product, it's getting in, that's the issue. Once you're in, you can land and expand. And I think that's the problem with construction is, let me try and advertise somewhere that is very dusty, dirty, hard work, no nonsense. Traditionally, it's been known as a thick-skinned industry versus you can go to an office, you have all the amenities, maybe you have a latte machine or whatever, right?
Press a button.
Yeah, press a button. It's a robotic, And so if you're young and you're looking at, the world through the North American lens, quality of life generally has been increasing over the past 100 years. We've been going more away from hard labor towards services type, economy-driven business. So it would make sense that this day and age, the younger generation is also more inclined towards, a life that reflects that personal and professional life that hits more of that professional services side of things. So how do we get people in? And I think it goes back to education at a young age. It comes back to when we look at kids, like I've got a daughter, I know Stephen, you have kids, Lars, I'm not sure if you have kids as well. Yeah, 3, there you go. My daughter thought, still does, like garbage trucks are cool, construction sites are cool. Inherently, I think all kids know that. And then, by the time we get to university age, it's almost like an embarrassment if you go into construction.
I guess, why do they think it's cool then? And then why at university say, wait, cool anymore?
This is a hot take, man, and this is my perspective again. So when I was in university, I did a lot of, arts kind of education. So to balance, obviously, like the architectural technology education, I had a lot of, psychology, sociology, anthropology kind of classes. And what you start to think, or it's hard to ignore, is it's been the way, I think, since, Vanderbilt and JP Morgan and all those guys started started setting up the education system to make people more inclined to partake in the economy, right? And now you look at the decades and we went from a hard labor economy to a more, professional services economy. The education kind of changed. You look at the university side of things in the US especially, and it went from liberal arts being something that was really highly regarded to being potentially looked at kind of negatively. And I think there's a lot of those factors, social influences, and geopolitical influences, and the advancement of society, which is reflected. And it takes generations, but I think that's what's happened, is it's not as simple as, one thing or another. Go ahead, sir, Stephen.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think there's a human factor too, which is, I think we all like easy and we don't always like hard. And I think there is this reality where project delivery is hard. Working a project, showing up at 6 a.m., working till 6, working weekends, doing whatever it needs to deliver a job is really hard. It's really rewarding in a team context. But I think we've gotten to this point where we have, TikTok videos of people's, day in the life of an engineer, day in the life of, everyone's aware of everyone's kind of day to day. And so if you're looking at career options and you see someone working at Salesforce that wakes up at 9, shows up, it gets kombucha, and then sits at a little desk, and then you see a superintendent showing up at 5 a.m., like, you just know that there's a spectrum of what the life's going to look like. So I think there's that factor as well. But I am curious as we look at all the different AI forecasts, the thing that I think grounds us the most is the quantity of infrastructure that is going to be needed to support kind of the AI reality that we think is coming. Is going to require so many resources. It's essentially a race to, can we bring up the next labor source or replace it with robots, right? And so, but I think it's going to have to be a bit of both. So I think you're right. There's a cultural component. Lars, do you see schools starting to address this at all at the younger ages?
No, I do not. Hamad, what I appreciated about what I heard you say was, my kids still think construction site's super interesting, right? They still think that trash truck is interesting. My youngest son wanted to be an Amazon delivery guy because he associated, a truck, a box, and something surprising inside it. He wanted to deliver that because there's joy associated with that, because he receives joy, right? Like, fascinating psychology at age 5 years old when he associates all that together. Now he's like, Dad, when are you going to do a concrete? I'm like, I don't know. So, but you got to invite me. Remember, you're going to take me out there, right? So if you ask Stephen, are schools encouraging this? No, they're not. I believe it's guys like us, the community, children, as parents, we just gotta invite them. Like, I can't wait to, get my, when they're all teenagers, get them out, go on a job site, sweep, push a broom. How many PM supers, experience that growing up? My dad was in construction, right? And a lot of that, is passed on. I think there's this idea. You brought up Salesforce, right? Pick a SaaS company of the Bay Area. Yeah, you can make a quick buck, right? But what's the destination, right? Or what's the journey? And what are you interested in? And I think, having experienced sort of multiple different, chapters around business and life thus far, it's really easy to get focused on the destination rather than enjoy the journey. And I think construction is a journey industry where you can get an incredible amount of value knowing that you show up at 5 a.m. to open up that job site, enjoy coffee with the guys, talk about safety, orient everyone with tasks that day, and watch that progress. And everyone gets to go home safe. Like, there is fulfillment in that. And if you drive around, it's like, I'm always amazed. Construction, the industry of construction built everything that's around us. You're welcome. Your toilet works. You're welcome. Right? So I think there's blinders on. And to your point, AI and energy and infrastructure in this country, I'm confident there'll be a resurgence. And for a while there, I was ready to run away from it. And now it's like, no, this is the right place to be, because that's, part of an economy and what makes this country great. Look at our infrastructure. I've traveled all around the world. There's a lot of places that don't have what we have. So very thankful.
Yeah. Lars, don't get
But
into
not
the
Canada.
Canada.
Canada's
Yeah,
great.
don't get into that. Yeah. I was like, oh man, we're going back there again. No.
So maybe going back to when we think about the ingredients that are attempting to solve the labor challenge, as well as maybe address some of the inefficiencies of the commercial contracting model, I think a lot of us were drawn to the innovation category because we saw it as upstream of some of these downstream issues, right? And whether it was different lean principles or BIM, innovation offered this opportunity to reset the foundation. And specifically within a GC context, because, you know, it has the relationship with the owner, it has relationship with all the trade partners, and it touches a lot of different things, right? And so it's large, or when you look at innovation, being in that space for as long as you were, what were some of the gaps, but also what were some of the ways in which it did hit the mark? Like when you assess maybe just the category of innovation, can you kind of speak to where we're not hitting the mark and where we are?
Oh, man, that is a really interesting question because there's so many perspectives there and it's kind of tough to say. So if we're looking at, I'm making this up, like Turner Construction versus maybe, you know, DPR versus, you know, a mid-sized contractor from Alabama, it's going to be way different because their challenges are going to be a little bit different. And what I mean is some of them are generic challenges. So the cultural piece is going to be there for every company, right? The contractual and legal kind of piece is going to be there for every company. The cost, right? The fact that we don't really have 50% margins and we can't dump a bunch of money into R&D is going to be there for every company. The workforce challenge, we talked about all that kind of stuff as well. But when you get specific, if you're a mid-sized company, let's say 100 mil or less, or maybe that's not even mid-sized, but whatever, you know, you might be looking for a happy balance of, I want to keep my company to X size only because I can maintain my culture and I can play within a space I'm comfortable. So innovation for some of those folks may be pretty non-flashy, non-AI tools, just practical business workflow management kind of stuff, follow where the hurdles are. But I'd argue for the big companies is equally as important because of all this AI hype. It's almost become the tail wagging the dog kind of thing, right? So everybody now has to say they're doing AI, they're part of it because they want to manage a reputation in the industry and drive that forward, but at the cost of potentially leaving some of those non-flashy business workflow focused things behind. The innovation challenges, you don't always get to bring in things that are cool, flashy, exciting. A lot of it is going to be things that are hard, are really not maybe something that people would be outwardly excited to talk about at conferences or get a headline in the newspaper or whatever, or, you know, like you're saying, a Twitter, Instagram reel, yada, yada. But that's where the value is. And the other thing, just really quickly, you know, as I was doing this innovation stuff previously, I was able to get into a lot of groups, get coached by a lot of people, mentored by some, you know, fantastic business leaders across North America. And so what I pulled out of that was innovation is creating abundance where there was scarcity is the best way to describe it.
So so talk to me about your definition of abundance. What does that mean in your context that you just described?
In that context, if we're looking at construction, right now, abundance could mean providing a way to handle risk that was not scalable or like something we could do easily before. Because Lars, it might mean we needed a guy there for 30 years to inherently understand that, or it might mean a new technology that just came in that never existed that lets us look at it. So it's being able to deploy essentially innovation in a way that makes your business outcome better. It could be through risk management, a net new category, improving or complementing existing workflows. So when you think of photos, like when I was working on site originally 10, 12 years ago, I would go out with an actual digital camera, not an iPhone, right? And I would take 100 photos, and then the 360 camera came out, and then, you know, Multivista bought a couple of companies. You know, we have, you know, Struction Site got acquired by Drone Deploy, Open Space, you know, raised a lot of money. Now all of a sudden taking those photos became super easy to do, but it introduced a new problem now. So even though you're able to take photos easier, now people are like, well, where does this fit in, right?
Great. I took a lot of photos. Now what?
Now what? Now I start to see, wait a minute, photos before were just a record in case I got into litigation. Now photos are becoming a way to monitor project progress
Yep.
and health. So you created a new category and adding abundance through making something easier, but now you got to keep innovating to make that better.
Okay, so now I want to go back a little bit. And I agree with everything you just said. I'll share and Stephen, be curious what yours is, but when I hear abundance, I think time. We are here for but a short time. A third of our day, if we do it right, is sleeping. The other third is working. And maybe that other third, or maybe even less because of being in a car or something, is with our family. I believe what time. And as a CEO, how can I give them that time? And maybe they love construction and they're still going to work just as much, but it's efficiency. How can I provide them efficiency? And that's just so agree with, innovation, abundance, but I look at it around how can I provide the most efficient work environment for my team, and in a historically very manual, paper-oriented industry where, we talk about AI, but is AI solving the fact that the accounting department prints the invoice off, puts it in a red folder, walks upstairs to the ops department, puts it on the project manager's desk so that they can sign on up with a blue pen, and then you know what I'm talking about, right? So it's like, so is AI really the thing that's going to help us right now? Or,
Man,
oh
you're making
man,
me
he
think
said,
of something good. No, because you nailed another piece. So one thing I think you're right. Time is actually critical, right? That is the whole crux of construction or literally anything around money essentially is time. Because for us, productivity, how you get people in place in time, but then the financiers and the clients getting people in to lease the building or whatever. Time is everything. But there's something else that you hit there, which I've been thinking a lot about is, do you guys know Peter Drucker, the management? Yeah.
Management
Okay.
specialist.
Yeah, you got to check him out, Lars. He's really the OG thought leader, if that's the word you want to use.
oh, gee, let's go.
So he said something really good. There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done.
Oh, right.
Right?
I have to make a sign of that. That's amazing.
Yeah, spot on.
So,
I mean, when you think about that concept, though, I think one of the challenges, if we look at this problem through the lens of, we'll say, top 100 RGCs, we'll just pick on them. I think, I've worked at several. You've worked at a large one. Lars, you've been in the industry for a while. I think one of the challenges I see is when a smaller company becomes a mid-sized company, becomes a large company, there's a decoupling that happens between project level understanding and expertise. And it's almost two businesses. It's project delivery and it's the management of the machine that is project delivery. And the machine that manages project delivery has very little understanding of project delivery, which is the widget that the machine creates, right? And so, you could argue that every industry has a variety of this challenge, which is a lack of bridge or a disconnect between management and the front line. But I do think it leads to a fundamental disconnect between the leadership's ability to understand the problems that need solving. Because ultimately, if you're going to try and save people time, become more efficient, there has to be an understanding that there's an inefficiency to solve, right? And exists on a large scale. Do you guys agree?
I mean, Lars, you ran a company. I think you should run with it first, and then I'll add any thoughts to that.
So, the thing, I'll just say from my experience, the biggest blessing I had was never working for someone else. I did my time in the Navy, did that, and then got this wild idea to be a builder. And I was fortunate enough to study what some of the great, top companies did. And what's crazy is I was like, even mentored by him, and I'm like, oh, I need all these workflows and I need all these policy procedures. And it's like, no, you're really small. You don't need some of that stuff. And I realized as I was trying to implement that, and so if we want to just pause here and talk like value for hopefully listeners, it's like you have to right size your controls for the size of organization that you are. And I think there's a saying like it's really easy to write like 6 pages like a letter. I don't know if it was Roosevelt or Jefferson, but it was like, sorry, it took me so long because I made it one page, right? Getting it simple, to the point, very structured is a challenge. And I think as we grow, the leadership has to have the discipline and awareness around that their organization is becoming more complex, but they have to hold the line and sort of retool the machine to simplify based on what it is they're doing and how they're doing it, right? And frankly, committees don't solve that problem, right? And it's the operators that have to provide unfiltered feedback of how to simplify their life. And I was big into decentralized command, meaning I am going to provide as much authority and as much decision-making capability to those individuals after, they're trained or continue to be trained, and their proficiency is constantly increasing, and give them the ability to raise their hand and say, I need help. Like, I have a problem. I've got a personnel issue. I've got a sub issue. And then you call in the support troops, right? You call in the attorneys, you call in, ops director or whatever your organization looks like, but you allow for that decision-making capability at the lowest levels constantly. You give them a structure, you let them run, and then you don't bash them when they ask for help, right? And I think the old ways, the old guard, I'll call it, you should have known. Stupid, right? It's like, how's I supposed to know, right? Should come to you for help, and now you're telling me I'm an idiot, right? Like, we may have encountered coaches like that, and so we can sort of deal with it, but it's really hard to hear. And I think that like whole idea around we're a team is sometimes missed, and so I guess to sort of maybe wrap it up, I really believe in that concept of decentralized command. Leadership needs to own this 100% and constantly be attempting to simplify and try to cut out stupid rules. And I think it was the book Good to Great, which talked about, you kill the company, and what's killing the company, right? It's what are all these threats that come at. When was the last time some of these companies looked at themselves like, what are we actually doing? What are we accomplishing? Like, this is insane. So again, are we returning abundance to our teammates? And the answer I've experienced is a lot of times no. So who owns that? The leader owns it. The CEO owns it. And they've got to drive it.
Man. So you know how you brought up Good to Great? That's
Yes.
Jim Collins. Jim Collins was a student, or whatever you want to call it, disciple of Peter Drucker. Just full circle there.
There we go. Look at that.
Yeah. But there's another aspect. So there's this dichotomy that you talked about, Lars, of we need standardization and trying to force people to use technology from the corporate lens and whatever standardization. And you could argue that does create some repeatable, scalable outcomes, right? So when you saw project management systems in the 90s start to come out and early 2000s take off, it helped a lot of companies go bigger in the market because certain workflows were forced. But to your point, the autonomy you need to leave to the field teams, a project manager, a construction manager, a superintendent, intendant, foreman, so on and so forth, is such a hard kind of understanding, especially to your point, as you're growing a company. Say you're like, you start small, you know the crew, everybody there, and you fast forward to like, a 20, 50, $100 million organization, then you $500 million, $1 billion, $5 billion, 10 billion, and so on and so forth. And there's this thing that I was actually talking to a few folks about, because to your point, this is something that I've always wondered, is what is the balance of forcing people to use things and do it versus being a little bit more, like you said, empowering the field grassroots, right?
Okay, let's hear it. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so this dude named Melvin Conway created something called Conway's Law. And I'll try and summarize it. So organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. So if you're creating this hierarchy of head office versus field staff, that in nature of the hierarchy is a silo. But then
Yes.
you look at pre-con, estimating, VDC, scheduling, so on and so forth. Those are all silos as well. So you can essentially get more collaborative organization and get more productivity if there's an integration or cohesiveness. So think about project teams. When I started on site, to your point about the guys yelling at you when you're asking for help, first day I show up and I introduce myself to our two general supers. One guy's 30 years in the game. The other guy's like almost 30 years in the game. And they're like, who the are you, man? And I'm like,
Are you here?
why are you here? I'm like, and knowing me at that time, I love technology. I still do. But that was the first thing I was like, well, I'm your new BIM coordinator. In hindsight, that's probably not the best answer. So he says, you know what? Get the out of here. Come back when you can make the excavator dig a fucking hole. And I was just like, oh shit, man.
Oh man,
right.
it's happening.
It's
And
happening.
getting kicked off a job site as a young engineer is like a rite of passage. I think I've been kicked off my first job. They were like, get out of here. All right, keep going. Sorry.
No, that's so true, right? Just to clarify, I'm not an engineer though, because I don't want the engineers to get mad, especially in Canada. If you've seen, we've got like the pinky
Oh, the
rings
engineer
and
ring.
stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
But then they sent me on a wild hunt for sky hooks, right? So that was another thing. It's like, okay, your job today is to go find the sky hook and make sure everything's good with it. And they let me loose on site, and all the guys were playing around, and they're like, oh yeah, you got to go up to level 14. And it's a tower being poured with concrete. There's no escalators. You got to use, ladders in the core, and it's super sketchy compared to being an architectural office. So you're going out, you're talking to these guys, hey man, I'm looking for the sky hook because that guy told me to go find it. Oh yeah, keep going up. Yeah. And then eventually I get up, and I remember the concrete foreman that we had there, he's like, sorry to break it to you, man, they've been fucking with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've just been pulling your leg. There's no sky hook. You passed the test, go back inside and tell them to F off, pretty much. That's how you're going to pass the test. So that was kind of leading to the point of Conway's organizational structure, saying you could have a really good project from management's perspective. You've got the right numbers, you've estimated, bid it properly, but you have a team that doesn't work together and you're not going to have a great outcome. Or you could have a really bad job where you're already under profit because you missed something in the estimate, but you have a really good A team and they work together like no tomorrow, and that job's going to go fantastic. And so I think, that is kind of some thoughts that I have when you think about the scale of companies going up, trying to keep that culture, finding the balance between grassroots and also between having standardization and efficiency as well. If we're creating silos in the organizational structure, people are not going to be cohesive unless you're super lucky.
So I think we've sort of aired the dirty laundry, right? We've talked about some of the challenges, some of the things that are going on out there. What do you see if you had this perfect laboratory environment, right? And maybe it's not perfect, but what's the future? What do you see working? And how in software there's like these personas, right? Well, who's our ideal buyer, right? Well, okay, how do they view the world? And it's interesting because my ask is, and again, this goes back to value, right? Who's listening? I feel that this ideal future needs to be from the perspective of a super quality safety PM. What's a functional accounting department of the future look like at a GC? What's the CFO's job? What's the CEO's job? What's the COO's? So I guess, my question, and Stephen, comment, but it's more or less this, okay, great. There's some challenges. But if some real dynamic leaders are going to take this to heart and say, yeah, let's go create a team 6, right? And go lock some really smart people in the room and start building a new machine in a hangar that's secret in the desert while we continue to operate this one. And one day this will just phase out and the new technology, F5, Gen 5 strike fighter comes in, boom, we're here, light switch on, off, boom. What's it look like? Start small, superintendent, abundance, superintendent, or maybe PM. You choose persona.
And so you're not going to like this because I feel like I want to go to the bigger picture first.
That's fine. Start there.
Right?
Yeah, whatever.
And to your point, I think the personas, we focus on the superintendent and the foreman and the boots on the ground the least generally, yet they're the most critical. And it makes sense too, again, going back to like the organizational theory, society shifting towards more services and stuff like that. Focus usually comes on back office and then is trickling down. And now we're seeing even in construction tech, some of the folks coming in saying, okay, we want to create things for the boots on the ground instead of anybody else. So that to say, if we go higher level, you're a client, you want to build a building, you go to get a loan from the bank and, you get your partners together to get your cap rate and pencil everything out. Then you go get a contractor, you're an architect, yada, yada, get it done, turn it over, you have building operations. Nowhere in that process are you incentivized in North America to reduce waste, to add technology, to make it better, to make it world leading. Instead, we've relied on the kind of entrepreneurial spirit and the kind of innovation of all of the people in the process, and we've gotten different types of contracts instead. So going from hard bid to cost plus or CM at risk, IPD, design, build, alliance, so on and so forth. So that is the issue, I think, is the framework we have is not going to give us the outcome we know that we all talk about we need. And we can focus on like the superintendent persona, I think, or the PM or the client and so on and so forth, and make things incrementally better. Or we can step back and just say, this whole thing is broken. And now we have finally the ability to look at it and say, there's a better way to do this. How do we do that better? Change the paradigm completely.
Okay.
And we know the constraints of, we don't want to be vertically integrated. We know what Katera tried to do and some of the failures there. And we also know that the scalability of that is not there. So what is the right approach for us as a society? Unfortunately, that's where it needs to start. But if you're an entrepreneur listening to this, then you need to start a new construction business that flips the paradigm, brings in architecture, brings in engineering, works really closely with subcontractor partners, and gets rid of billable hours altogether and focuses on the outcome and being a piece of the incentives along the way. And who wants to do that? Who has the wherewithal, the energy, the capital to go and do that? So that's my perspective. It could be completely wrong, right? But that's kind of where I'm leading towards is if we want to see that change, we got to look at it.
I think that's fascinating. And I love that. I think it's also interesting when you think about where we started the conversation, innovation, some of the misses, some of the gains, and we try to identify ingredients to the problem. We kind of consolidated that down to culture and leadership. But then you've introduced another ingredient, which I think is really important, which is can you have a vision that addresses some of these things? So if you have vision plus culture and leadership, you could really do some damage in terms of resetting kind of the paradigm of what a contractor looks like. But I think at the same time, it doesn't really have to be completely revolutionary to go start a contracting business and flip the current paradigm, which is start a business with a decentralized command kind of culture. Think about the end in mind. Think about the way in which people are treated. Stay really close to your end product. I think there's I'm always fascinated by the basics, because the basics, we so often don't get them right, whether it's scheduling and critical path methodology, whether it's building digitally and BIM, whether it's the be nice to people principle. There's just some basics that we all seem to miss, right? And so when you're looking, if you're an entrepreneur and you're dabbling in construction, there's just so many opportunities because the basics are getting missed. And the basics are getting missed because there's so much work, there's so much demand. There isn't necessarily an impetus yet to require this kind of paradigm shift. But I think that's coming. And I think whether it's AI as an impetus, whether it's the labor shortage, that time is coming when I think some of that fat is going to get trimmed.
Yeah. What do you think, Lars? Where do you think this is going to happen? Because I think that's the piece. Is it going to happen small and work its way up? Is it going to be this foundational thing? We don't know, but I'd love to pull your threads on that
So,
too.
Let's look at other industries, right? The guys that get so big really stop innovating, right? At some level, right? The big guys start acquiring the small, innovative, fast-paced, gazelle-like companies, right? The guys are moving so fast, innovating, boom, boom, boom. Construction's interesting in that, the margins are tight, right? So now you're the small, innovative company, but what does that really mean for your margin? Is it a 50%? Is it a SaaS model margin? No, I don't think you're going to pull that off, right? It might go up 1, 2, maybe 3 points. If it's what will drive that? Is it workflows? Is it, structured data that people immediately plug in? Is it standardization in and around the industry? I don't know exactly. However, with AI, and I've seen this, there'll be $1 billion companies with like 2 people in them, right? And I think about construction. Is that possible? Don't know, right? I really don't think we can have Jarvis out there behind a monitor and the owner's okay with Jarvis, right? But what I see is access to information, data, the ability to make decisions. And I think if we are going to be successful in decentralized command, right, and execution, the guys in the field have the information to make good decisions, right? You can't send troops out to the front lines and not tell them what's coming at them, right? Not tell them the gear they need. They need information to protect themselves and have a successful mission. And it is so hard for the guys that make the money for the company, the guys in the field, put the work in place, I think, to get information in an efficient and structured way that helps them make decisions. We are siloed. And decoupling that and pushing that information, I believe, is the key that will unlock a lot of it. And I believe those people in the field designing that information. Why do I have to call the office to get this information? Why is it so? Why do I have to log into 4 different software systems that constantly make me change my damn password every 30 days? Like, you know what they want to say to the software? Go find the skyhook. That's what they want to say to them.
That's awesome. There's a couple of things there that are really good. The first piece too, which kind of I can't stop thinking about, is what you mentioned is right now a lot of people in the field are trying to find a solution to design and constructability issues, right? So that's why we need to decouple a lot of the decision making, is so they can be fast and fluid. And like you said earlier, concrete trucks coming, where is edge of slab? Or where is this revolving door detail going to actually look like given the constraints we have, so on and so forth. But the other part is, why aren't we moving things front and center so it's easier for the guys in the field when they get a good set of drawings to work with the trades and things to go, which again, we can bug Stephen about that whole aspect of like, why hasn't been properly taken off? And I think that goes back to that concept that we're talking about, the current paradigm and that fragmentation kind of, we were talking about Conway's law against all the stakeholders, and how before, when I went to like architecture school or whatever you want to call it, we talked a lot about the master builder, right? Where one party was incentivized to make sure the outcome of the entire project went well. And as we got more sophisticated with the division of labor, as we progressed from, the industrial revolutions over the past 250 years that we've seen, the 5 or 6 waves there, we became more and more specialized and smarter as a society. But individually, we had a lot more constrained knowledge about the other overlapping pieces. And that, as a construction kind of company, I think that's evident because of pre-construction services becoming a very, very apparent rising offering now across North American contractors. They do a lot of pre-con. Clients are okay to pay for it because they know that it moves that coordination in the field up front, right? So that's a long way of saying, if we want to really get the outcomes, which I think as an industry, we know what the problems are from the design, constructability, quality, rework, health and safety, scheduling and planning side of things. Well, how do we incentivize these parties to work better, ignoring the fact that we're trying to graft a new system into this, which is what we've done with IPD and all these others. Right. So I don't have an answer, but yeah, Stephen, jump in. Why isn't some of those things working too? And do you think that's a good assessment, or do you guys think I'm out to lunch, or,
No, I think there's something to that. I mean, I think BIM adoption there's some education challenges. I think, especially from the GC side, I remember when I was a PM, my understanding of BIM was really, it was attempting to drive coordination, and I couldn't always kind of piece together why it didn't really drive that much ROI for me. But as I've learned more, I think there's a few reasons. One, we would always start the coordination process too late. And so we were already moving forward with construction in the field before we had it built digitally. And then we're using design models that if you look at the transfer release forms, when they send over the Revit files, they're telling you not to use it. And so the backgrounds are inaccurate. And then I think if you don't include all the right detail in your model and you coordinate space for overhead ducts, but you're missing conduit of a certain size that really does need a passageway, it's still going to get reworked in the field. And so I think there has to be a real respect for the digital environment in the same way that we respect the physical, and we're just not there yet. We don't treat it as real.
So let me ask a question around that. So real respect for the digital environment. What's the project size that justifies it?
Yeah, I think it's a factor. I think that's going to be unique to every company, right? Because ultimately it's a risk evaluation, right? Which is how much risk do you want to attempt to navigate, mitigate digitally versus potentially experience physically. But that said, I think to your point, if I'm doing, a $5 million reno, I'm probably not going to be putting, $250,000 into a construction model, right? So there's certainly a spectrum there, but I do want to be sensitive to time. Go ahead, Hamad.
No, I was going to say, what if we look at it from another perspective as aggregating some of the smaller projects? I think if you think about it that way across North America and you look at the amount of waste that's created, like that should be enough of a lever in some way for, your county or your country or whatever to want to create a different incentive. Because if I'm competing against Lars, like as, Hamad Construction Inc. and Lars Construction Inc., and we just want to get the job done at that scale, I'm not incentivized.
No, you're not. There's no incentive. None. In fact, your job is to spend the least amount of money in accomplishing what's required in the contract.
Well, and if we go back to time as a measure of value, I think there's two delivery streams for value here from a building digitally standpoint. One is you plan digitally, so actual work in the field is much less. The second delivery of value is to the owner in the form of a digital twin, which is that FM team spending that much less time trying to navigate documents, trying to figure out what's actually in their building. And so I think there's probably a lot in that we could maybe unpack. I did want to ask one bonus question before we depart, Hamad, which is we're big on leadership and mentorship. I benefited from some great mentors in my life. And so if you could mentor your younger self back when maybe you were, an architectural technologist, which I picked up from your background, which I love that title.
Yeah.
But if there's one piece of advice you give that younger Hamad, what would it be now that you have the perspective on kind of the industry?
That is way too deep of a question to think of on the spot.
Yeah,
man, I don't have a good answer, but I guess all I would say is the easiest advice, just generalizing, would be work harder than those around you. And if you get to a point where you feel like you're now at a level where nobody else is working hard, you got to surround yourself with people who are working even harder so you can keep learning.
Good advice.
Yeah, that's good.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lars.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite piece of like tech that you think provides the most value day to day to you or to others around you, that if you could tell listeners like, hey, you guys should probably check this out, or this thing works. I mean, this thing creates abundance for me.
Dude, Timescapes, obviously.
Well, of course, for our clients, Timescapes is an obvious one because time to value is probably the best in the industry. But for myself personally, man, I don't know, but I'll give you a bad example. I tried something recently called the Clicks keyboard, which I couldn't get the BlackBerry out of me.
Well, you're Canadian, BlackBerry, right?
Yeah, exactly, right.
You found a BlackBerry case? That's incredible. And that's what happened to RIM.
That's what happened. I went through every possible scenario in my mind of how Steve Jobs would roll over in his grave if he found out I did this. But I tried it. It didn't work. So maybe that's what I'll leave it at, is keep trying tech. It doesn't always work. Don't get tired, because eventually you'll find something like Lars is talking about, which I can't think of right now.
Yeah. I love that.
Do you have something? Yeah. Do you have something though? You got to have a piece of tech if you said it.
For me, well, again, personas, right? So what are you touching? What are you feeling every day, right? The CEO is going to be different than the problems he or she's dealing with, and the superintendent, right? And what that person's dealing with. So, yeah, I could make a plug for what I believe is a solution to help companies and structure everything, right? It's Contract Sky is my own platform, but it's also, here I am, I guess you could say getting back involved in construction and ops. And I'm like, okay, there are complex solutions now to solve workflows in companies and everything. And for me, I'm helping a construction company right now. The subs are 4,000 line item sub list. I'm like, oh man, I'm going back in time, baby. This is exciting. And I'm like, I had this solved at my last company. It got big. It got nasty. It got clunky. How can I simplify this right now? And so, just personally, me, I'm experimenting with something called Precon Suite. And I'm like, it keeps it simple. It keeps it structured. There's speed. That's all I'm looking for. Efficiency, abundance, right? So, that would be the one thing right now that, I guess you could say is the problem I'm trying to solve. One thing that if we're going to go down this, to your BlackBerry iPhone keyboard issue, I abhor email. It makes us slaves to sit right behind this thing with a keyboard and just, and I long for the day of tool provides more efficiency around communication, and that doesn't require so much energy. And I've looked at recently like these AI solutions around, tools to manage an inbox and everything. And I'm like thinking about experimenting with one of those because
like Superhuman.
Yeah, or Fixer or some of these others. And I just think, like, what's the greatest asset, right? It's the individual. And if I can make that individual more efficient and X or X, whatever they're trying to do, like, that's a big deal. So and that to me is how we increase margins, right? That's how we level up an organization and invest in technology. You make them more efficient. So I guess you could say, like, I really struggle with how we as an industry do everything in an email, right? It's all emails. 400 email. I mean, I was helping a PM earlier today. He probably had 200 red emails that he had flagged that he's like, you got to respond to all these. I'm like, I don't know how you're ever going to do it.
Yeah.
And this individual isn't managing that many projects. What we're seeing is patterns in the industry, right? And that's what burns people out. That's what turns people off, right? So,
I'll just offer my unsolicited input. Otter AI. So we all sit in so many meetings, right? And I realized that I was spending so much of my time trying to track meeting minutes in the meeting and then summarize meeting minutes and then think about what should go back out to clarify what was agreed upon, right? And I was like, I got sick of it. I bought this Otter AI. I'm not incentivized by Otter AI in any capacity, but it works. Like, it just does the summary, it creates a transcript. I can download the transcript, I can push it into ChatGPT, I can ask it to like summarize in different ways. That has saved me on at least an hour a day.
Every project engineer, every architect, every PM should have an AI tool to summarize meeting minutes.
100%
in this industry. So you ready for this one? Fathom is free.
Well, there you go.
Fathom is free. Fathom, Fathom.ai or Fathom meeting minutes.
But if it's free, you're the product, Lars.
Data. I don't want to go down that because ChatGPT, I was going to say, even though there's a bunch of others, is such a fantastic product minus the data policy, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But like, think about how many people sit in a trailer right now trying to scribe, right?
Yeah.
Actually doing a really crappy job.
Yeah. Stop.
I mean,
everyone stop.
I couldn't take a single note in class because I would already forget what the other point, and then I'm like, what, do I just write down every word? I don't know what you want me to do. So it's how can leadership see the power of a tool like that, experiment with it, find out which is the right one for the organization, knowing that guys out in the field are the ones doing the heavy lifting, not me behind my, perfectly groomed, desktop and everything, and respond to what their needs are and give them those tools. I appreciate that, Stephen. That's fantastic.
Well, Hamad, thanks for going over with us. This has been lots of fun. Where should people who are obviously going to be intrigued by this conversation go to find you? LinkedIn, Twitter, where are you?
Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn and actually on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Formerly known as, let's go.
And if you are interested in connecting, talking about just innovation and construction tech in general, or then also because I did make a shift over to Timescapes, learning about why I did that and why I believe this company so much, then I'd love to talk with you and get in touch. And yeah, I'm sure you can also distribute my email, Stephen, as well, if people want to chat.
We'll put it in the show notes. Fantastic. Well, this has been fun, Hamad. I think we improved American-Canadian relations by a margin, just in this conversation alone. But yeah, Hamad, thanks for taking time with us. This has been fun. Thanks, man.
Hey, man, I'm going to get a Canadian flag next time so I can match up with you guys.
We outnumber you. He was very strategic.
There you go. I appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you.